long-winded. So what I do is essentially building enclosure consulting. I spend a lot of time doing other committee type of work and I'm active in the industry. But day to day, I'm out on the job with my boots and hard hat and all the rest of the gear, safely working on building enclosures. Every kind of aspect is really of interest to me, but ultimately it's about the performance of the enclosure and to make sure that as future occupants of the building don't have the types of problems that the other side of our consulting careers deals with, the forensics, the ugly side. And I'm sure we're really all here today to hopefully understand better how we can improve our building performance through commissioning and not get ourselves into trouble whether we are an architect, contractor, a subcontractor, an owner, or developer of such. So I am interested. I know a fair number of folks and faces in the room, but foremost I'd like to ask, who do we have as subcontractors? So primarily waterproofing George D hosts. Okay, so we haven't branched out. That's good because today I really did focus the presentation more talking about waterproofing simply by our presence here at George D. Allen's. So I would like to thank Dan and Mike Deck for inviting me here today. It's nice to come out and talk about stuff that really is pretty interesting too. How about contractors, general contractors? Okay, great, because commissioning is really going to, if you haven't already been exposed to it, and who has? Who's been on a commissioning project where their building enclosure has been commissioned? Okay, good. So I hopefully you have some good experience and perhaps some horror stories as well for you to share with the group. Probably folks have been on projects where we've had MEP commissioning done. Yeah, okay, so that's pretty normal. Architects. Gosh, I'm very disappointed. Did you not invite architects?
We did invite some architects, yes. It shows you how much respect the water.
You need to put on the bottom of your invitation that you're providing alcohol.
It is the Caulktail.
All right, and I know some other consultants are here. So how many consultants? Okay, great consultants. So would-be potential commissioning authorities or commissioning providers as well. Who have I missed? Owners? Yeah. Owners, right. Thank you guys from the school district. So really, commissioning is all about trying to control our risk and provide buildings in accordance with what the owners are really looking for out of their new facilities. Or retro commissioning, which is essentially taking an existing facility and evaluating what its problems are and whether it be recladding, re-waterproofing or whatever, or tightening it up to improve perhaps energy efficiency or such, but making our existing buildings as well more efficient, higher performances, for example. So commissioning is one of these unfortunate aspects of our industry today. It has become more and more apparent to us that we really need to have a better focus on quality control, our quality process of delivering buildings. So holistically, understanding exactly what the owner expects out of his buildings, how the architects design them, how they specify them in order to achieve the performance that the owners want, and then how the contractors are both purchasing their packages, coordinating their subcontractors, implementing their quality control programs, and how the subcontractors are actually installing their works. And then ultimately, once we have a completely built project, how are the owners actually maintaining their building? How do they understand exactly what to do? So it's understood that we have a fair number of problems with our existing buildings. This was an article, I think, from an ENR magazine, 2011, which indicates that the majority of our claims in the insurance world are a result of our building enclosure problems. So this is a well-documented problem, and also probably the source of a fair number of people's work here in the room. But I look at commissioning as risk management. How can the owner manage his risk? What level of risk is he willing to accept with moving in and occupying his building? So again, we're focusing on waterproofing, and this is a scene that we don't want to see. No owner wants to have his almost complete basement that he's about to move into full of water, with some efforts to having inject cracks and water infiltration through the wall, and the resulting kind of nasty efflorescence and such that comes through. Who's seen this? Okay, yes, we've all seen it. So how can we kind of go about trying to assure that we don't actually continue to have these problems? The commissioning process is one that is well established in the construction industry. It's established essentially through ASHRAE Guideline 0. It was first defined in 2005 as a quality-oriented process. That commissioning process as a guideline has now been transferred just last year into the commissioning standard 202. So ASHRAE has introduced something that can be included in code. Okay, and what we now need to appreciate is exactly where this movement of commissioning is going. It's not just a voluntary process, because it's starting to become codified, which is where it begins to impact all of us. As far as building enclosure specifically is concerned, I was part of the committee back in 2006 that worked on the first Guideline 3, which was the building enclosure commissioning process. It was a approximately 400-page document, about 40 or so pages of which it was actually the process, and about 260-odd pages worth of annexes. The real value of that document is in the annexes. It's got some great checklists, it's got some great information about how to perform a design review. It's got some information about testing programs. It is still available, but won't be for very long. I'll tell you the reason why. So, Guideline 3, 2006, the annexes are the same as in 2012, and it's available on the Whole Building Design Guide website. If you simply do a search on NIBS Guideline 3, it'll pop up and you'll be able to get a free PDF of that document. For about another, well, how long does it take for an ASTM committee to approve a standard? Unbelievably, ASTM E283 was progressed through the acceptance process fairly quickly, to everyone's kind of surprise. So basically there was, on one hand, a free document, the NIBS Guideline 3, and ASTM figured, well, we should write a standard practice. And we should provide that to the community for $45. So you can purchase ASTM E283 for $45. The process is very similar, if you will. However, the standard has a fair number of qualifications requirements to it. It articulates exactly the testing that you need to be doing, and it also identifies process. So I'm not going to get into the weeds on standards here, but usually you don't include process in a standard. However, this committee decided to pursue that. And there was an agreement made between NIBS and ASTM. ASTM approached NIBS and said, look, you know, there's two documents in the industry. Why do we need two documents? Why don't we just stay with ASTM, it's a recognized name, and we'll just kind of, you know, be able to provide this one document, and then let's decide that we're going to have some certifications. So we're going to be able to provide certifications for building enclosure commissioning authority folks, or providers as we're soon going to be called. And NIBS, you can provide the education, and you can charge for that education. And ASTM, you can provide the certification, which of course you will be charging for in addition to your standard. That's the direction that we are going right now. Okay? So sooner or later, in the next 6 months to a year, I anticipate that the NIBS Guideline 3 will be not available, because that was part of the agreement between NIBS and ASTM. And in lieu of, you'll be able to obtain the ASTM standard here, and without the annexes. The annexes are kind of gonna just fade away. So my advice to you is move ahead and get that download for free, and then you'll have all of the good stuff of the annexes, and also simultaneously be able to provide commissioning in accordance with ASTM if the industry decides to go kind of forward in that direction. Anybody familiar with the ASTM?
Yes.
Okay. You going to tell me you're part of the committee that voted on it?
No, no, I'm not.
You're part of the committee that
vetoed
it?
Don't blame me. I just read it. Did not vote on it.
So what was your thoughts on the document?
Actually, I got more out of the NIBS document than I did the standard. Other
You
than
don't have to say that. I know we're recording, but you don't have to say that.
Well, quite frankly, the qualifications were helpful on the ASTM standard. But the NIBS document, the appendix in the NIBS document were very helpful when I was trying to qualify exactly where, as a building consultant, where we would fall into that commissioning process.
It's a pretty extensive standard, isn't it? I mean, I look at it, and we were involved with the process, so it's kind of adaptable. We're not mandating it like the standard is. But for someone to adopt that standard, it was really essentially written for government agencies. So my fear is, although there's some really, really good stuff in that standard, it's going to be quite unaffordable for the average kind of developer or the average...
It's not very practical at all for a small developer.
Yeah. The process is extensive. I mean, it goes forward as to for the commissioning provider to actually offer input on the bids that the subcontractor submits, and to cross-evaluate bidding documents. So it goes a little beyond the realm of standard commissioning. So, but it's not code. We don't anticipate the ASTM, despite other people's efforts, will become code.
Are you on the code committee?
No, but I know folks that are. There was an effort to move forward and to try and get that only ASTM into the code, but it was unsuccessful. Yeah. But we are moving in the direction of commissioning becoming part of the code, becoming more a part of our standard way we are designing and constructing buildings. So I offer these to you if you're involved with projects. These are things that you need to become aware of. And if there were architects in the room, I would be specifically pointing here to ASHRAE's standard 189.1, which is a high performance building standard, and the International Green Construction Code 2012, which both do now require building enclosure commissioning as part of the actual design, or included in the design process. So looking ahead a little bit, as we see kind of the writing on the wall for commissioning of the building enclosure to be included in more code documents, programs, etc., we are looking at certifications. And there's various opinions on the value of certifications. If we look at the mechanical commissioning industry, you can appreciate that there's like about 6 or 7 organizations that offer certifications. They're of all different kind of acronyms and such that you can have after your name. They all mean all different things. They can be an online course for 4 hours. They can be sit down, take a course for 4 days and sit and take an exam. But they all give you the same kind of commissioning provider designation. So that's going to be something to really kind of take a look hard at. Currently, there's only one certification available for building enclosure commissioning, and that's available through the University of Wisconsin. They'll just kind of get into the weeds for a minute, but the only difference between this and the new ASTM, which may come online in the next couple of years, certification is that the certification through ASTM is going to be ISO, go through the ISO process, the International Standards Organization, versus the University of Wisconsin, which is more of an educational certification. So whether that matters anything, I don't know, but just that is the difference. So you'll have the UW, you'll have the ASTM, and then what am I going to do with this certification? You know, who cares? What does it matter? You know, if I'm qualified, if I've done these you know, X number of buildings, and I'm really good at what I do, you know, why do I need a couple of more letters after my name? Okay. Well, that's going to be an interesting question because that's always the case with certifications, right? How much of my experience versus being the first year out of college and I can get my certification, but I've got no experience. So, the GSA actually includes building enclosure commissioning in its P100 document. So folks working on the General Service Administration buildings, various cities and states are looking at requiring or do require currently building enclosure commissioning, for example, Houston. But the biggest one that's impacting us all, and especially folks probably in this room, designers, consultants, is LEED version 4. And where that is going for fundamental and more importantly, enhanced commissioning. So, who's working on LEED projects? Pretty much, yeah, almost everyone. I mean, or has worked on LEED projects. The school district guys, are you LEED, or do you have kind of jurisdiction of your own buildings?
No, we don't certify. We
Okay.
try to design till we
You
standard.
design, okay.
We do light commissioning, not full-blown building envelope and all that.
I found that to be kind of a nice way to approach it. You don't have to kind of pay for the fees associated with LEED, but you design to those objectives, which is practical. You know, if you don't need the plaque, then why spend the money for the plaque? So fundamental commissioning, it did not used to include building enclosures. It now does. Version 4 has been a couple of years in the making, but it's kind of limited. It really doesn't, you know, kind of get into the real roots and the merits of building enclosure commissioning. It kind of dances around the edges. It includes that the statement of the owner's project requirements, which is basically what does the owner expect out of his building enclosure, to be included, and also the basis of design. The commissioning authorities to review the basis of design. There's also one design review that's required under version 4 in the fundamental. And this is interesting, that a qualified member of the design or construction team not associated with the project can be a commissioning authority. So you don't need to be certified. Maybe, you know, you don't have to have all that much experience even. But just so long as there's not that kind of, there's kind of a firewall, if you will, that's developed between the actual project design and construction and the folks performing the commissioning. Well, that changes a little bit when we get to the enhanced of LEED. So what was fundamental is included as a requirement. We now have the option to gain 2 points to perform building enclosure commissioning under enhanced commissioning. So the requirements are that, that the training is included in the construction documents, and this is specific to the building enclosure, the owner-occupant training. We develop an ongoing commissioning plan, and all of the OPR and BOD, so owner project requirements, basis of design tasks are also included. The design review also. What's not really specified, which is really super critical, is the construction phase. The construction observation and the performance testing, and that traditionally is where the rubber has met the road, if you will, in the mechanical world of commissioning. It's how are we going to verify that these systems actually perform as we expect they will. So we're moving on now to really talk about commissioning and the heart of it all. We kind of got rid of all of the code requirements, the nasty, the background stuff of why we're doing this. So we'll get into the meat of really what commissioning is. And if you've got questions or thoughts or opinions or such, I really appreciate hearing them. We can discuss them. I don't have a voice that lasts for an hour or so, so I really appreciate kind of sharing your thoughts during the presentation. To begin with, the commissioning phases begin with a focus on quality assurance. We begin with the pre-design phase, we move into the design phase, and as we switch into the construction phase, we go from method to quality control and validation. Some people prefer verification, then that's okay. So we go into the construction phase, post-construction occupancy. So that's kind of just how we break out the commissioning process and following the standard phases of the delivery of the project. A couple of things just to understand, if you will, off the top is you're probably very familiar with a consultant on your project. It's a very similar role. A consultant is not necessarily the one with the design liability. That's the architect's role. Similarly, the commissioning authority is in an advisory role. We're out there, we can't direct the work, but we can provide input back to the architect, who subsequently will provide that direction back to the contractor, and where it all falls down from there. Construction directive protocols, procedures, not changed. We follow the same standard formal commissioning process. We document the work as such and verify the performance. If we do note a deficiency or observe an issue, it's something that is not actually actionable. If you understand, there's no contractual requirement between a general contractor or a subcontractor with the commissioning authority. So we provide that information to you essentially in the spirit that you find that issue of concern also, and we'll address that issue. But understanding that you're not contractually obliged to address those issues. So something that's a little bit of a tough one to get your mind around, because you've got an observer out there in the field making observations, providing recommendations, but inherently when you look at the contractual language, you're not obliged to follow the commissioning authority's advice. You must always go back to the architect for that input. Now we're going to provide input to the architect, and hopefully that input thus is redirected, but just kind of putting all the players into perspective. Had folks been in a position where the commissioning authority's given directives and you've got to kind of say, no, step back a little bit?
I've been involved in a project where there was a commissioning specification, and it outlined testing procedures and quality control protocols that were to be followed, and it was used on the mock-up that was developed for the project. It was a big job. It was over $100 million job, and not the waterproofing portion, of course. But they finished the mock-up about the same time that they finished the building, and all the quality control protocols and all the things that came up through the mock-up really weren't instituted in the construction of the building. And somebody was really focused on us following the commissioning procedure for a mock-up that has since been destroyed and the building is still standing. So if the commissioning authority has no authority, then what good is it?
Well, it gets back to the commissioning process at heart, which is intended to be a collaboration focused on quality of the owner, contractor, the subcontractors, the architect, and the commissioning authority, the commissioning provider. And the intent, if we're all working together, is to take those deficiencies and to act on them basically for your own good. You and I might be on the same page as far as, yeah, that's a hole, that's not a hole. So it's in your best interest if we recognize something that you actually do something about it. It typically has to be a pretty good reason, like it's not in my scope, or that's that's an ad, or that's not required by the manufacturer, which is actually, that's always a debatable one. As far as how you react to it, it's unfortunate that example doesn't sound like it actually followed the typical commissioning process, because it would be normal that you would want to take that mock-up, given that it was scheduled early enough in the construction, which is also a critical issue, and take those lessons learned, take those issues, take that process, and then implement that in the construction.
Yeah, and it's, looking at it now, I can see where it's very valuable as a specialty contractor. In this case, what happened is they decided on a window system that was crappy, and the window system leaked and didn't perform at the highest level. The air barrier and other systems on the building did perform at that high level, but they had decided, I know we bought a shitty window, and that's what we're going to build with because they're already on the job, let's move on. So, and that's not, and that's, I see that really a lot.
Was the window in accordance with the specifications?
I don't know, because it wasn't my scope. But, I mean, it was approved and it was purchased, and
Yeah. I mean, that's probably one of the culprits that I see, as a consultant, is that the low bidder gets the job. They don't acknowledge that they're actually not going to use the basis design or any of the approved equals that are specified. They've kind of got this other, kind of back of house window.
or they VE'd it, one or the other.
Or they VE'd it. And it's only when the submittals come in that people recognize that the general contractor actually didn't purchase a window system that was in accordance with the specs. And henceforth, you end up with a catch-22. You're too far down the road with the window. You can't change. He's not going to change his bid. You've already gone there, and you end up with a system that doesn't perform as expected.
So it could be used as a vehicle to document somebody in that process, and it could be the owner that selected that and said, yes, I'm saving $200,000 by
Yes.
choosing this window. And so, okay, it doesn't meet the requirements and the objectives that you designed into the building, but you have once again selected it through the commissioning process. You know that this is not performing to the level specified.
That is true. The documentation of the entire process really gives everybody a backup. Because you're absolutely right. If the architect specifies a window, let's say, that's supposed to resist water penetration at 15 pounds a square foot, and what they've done, what's being purchased is a window that's, a 6-pound window, and the owner knows about it and saves a couple $1,000, then that requires a change in the owner's project requirements. So the owner's project requirements, we haven't got here yet, but it's a living document. If the owner wants to change his opinion about, where he wants to spend his money, or how the importance factors of some of the building,